What questions do you have? What do we need to clarify?
So, if worldview is pretty much you just what you believe, no matter what influence, why did it only come up in the 20th century? Because it didn't exist really. I mean, the way we define worldview, it existed forever. We always had opinions on it. So why is it so big in its place?
The idea of worldview really hits in the 20th century, largely due to a lot of those things that we pointed out in the previous section, with some of the philosophical reflection that develops, and the notion of modern life and modernity, and thinking about, and particularly in the latter part of the 20th century, people looking at this marginalization of Christianity and saying, well, what's replacing that? Since Christianity has been so influential. And so that's really where a lot of that really started to develop, is thinking about, now that we see Christianity kind of being pushed from the center, what's occurring there? And Goheen and Bartholomew really get into, I think, a pretty good discussion in some of the chapters. I can't remember if you read it yet, but it'll come up. But that's a really good question. Other questions?
Does the question of how do we tell what is right and wrong also take into consideration like younger people, and by younger I mean like children, and how they seem to, even without their parents' influence, seem to have some sense of right and wrong?
Well, I think that from a Christian standpoint, I would argue that we're embedded with a conscience, right? But there is also that idea of what we might call socialization, if we're looking at it from like a sociological or psychological standpoint, in that we socialize children. We socialize children to believe and accept certain things, particularly when it comes to values like what's right and what's wrong. And so children might have that innate sense of there are certain things that are right and certain things that are wrong, but what they're going to view as right and wrong is going to be shaped by their parents, their school teachers, their extended family, society, right, the media that they consume. And so there's that aspect of it. I believe that there are some things that are intrinsically right and intrinsically wrong without how I feel about them. Right? I could feel that some things are right and wrong. God, for me, God's the determiner of that. So there's something something separated from that. But as far as how I personally tell, it's a lot of what I've been socialized or what I've intentionally chosen. And so it's that process of childhood development has a big impact on that. What other questions? So let's break down the Christian worldview. Excuse me, lost a page of my notes. Let's break down the Western worldview first. What is it that is promoted in the West? So think about it. Our Western culture, what are some of the things that you would say? What's the great story being told in the West? What are some of the key beliefs or ideas that exist in Western culture today?
They were all considered equal.
All right, so the idea of equality, very important. In Western Europe, in the United States, a lot of emphasis on equality, and the idea of equality pushes a lot of the policy changes that we see in the United States, particularly recently, the idea of same-sex marriage. A lot of the argument for same-sex marriage had to do with notions of equality, right? So equality, very important in Western worldview. What are some other ideas or beliefs?
Relative truth.
All right, relative truth. All right, the kind of bringing in the equality, all truths being equal, right? Which makes truth relative. What else can you think of things promoted in our culture?
Self.
Right, the importance of the self, the importance of the individual.
You can go from nothing to something.
All right, yeah, especially in the United States, right? We have the American dream, right? That you could start on the wrong side of the tracks and end up a CEO, right? You could start in abject poverty and end up, a wealthy billionaire. Anything else you can think of?
Connection to the rest of the world is each other.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, and that's kind of shaped and modified over time. Our connections with other places. We're seeing a lot more in the late 20th century into the 21st century. The globalization. Right? We're connected with the rest of the world. Where in previous generations, a lot of it was American exceptionalism. Right? We're different. We're separate. We're distinct. We're seeing more of those interactions, and so the West has modified its thinking. Anything else you can think of? Well, I think we've hit several of the ones that I've pointed out, maybe worded slightly differently, but this idea of progress, right? Both as a culture, as a society, as a species, as human beings, right? Progress is something very, very important to us. We want to do better. We want to live better. We want to, physically be better. We want better technology. We want better culture, right? So we're wanting to see progress, socially, politically, individually. In general, the West has, sometimes more often than others, but traditionally, an optimistic view of humanity. Now, various times we've been more pessimistic, and I think we're kind of in a pessimistic swing right now. We're kind of in a downturn about the power of human beings, and when you look at society, we see a lot of negative things. But in general, I think a lot of the Western worldview has been one of optimism, right? That kind of, you can do it, right? You can achieve it. The world is getting better. But like I said, it kind of comes and goes, and I think we're kind of in a downturn at the moment, quite understandably when we look at a variety of things that are happening politically, a lot of things that are happening among different cultures and different populations. We see a lot of the atrocities taking place in the Middle East, both from the Syrian government and from ISIS and some other things like that. Those kind of things make us go, well, really, are we really progressing as a species? Freedom and prosperity. I think those two things have a lot of things connected with it, right? That idea of equality we talked about, and the self, and that prosperity is what you're driving for, right? You get a job, you get the best job because you want to make money, you want to be prosperous, you want to have stuff, and so connected with that is a lot of consumerism. That how we recognize value of people, oftentimes in the Western worldview, is based on the amount of possessions they have, the size of their bank accounts, right, the kind of house they have, the kind of car they drive. And while probably most of us, who in the West would say, no, a person's more valuable, their value is based on other things, right? The general narrative in our culture is about those kind of things. If you think about the kind of people that are lauded and applauded. Finally, of course, we already touched on, but I think kind of connected with progress and our optimism is the rather positive view of science and technology. That in general, most people in the West would say that development of science, development of technology leads us into a better state, right? It's optimistic that if we develop these things, we're going to be better. So we don't have time to address all of these questions, but think about these 4 questions related to some of those things. What are the greatest values in our society? Well, we talked about that a little bit, equality and the self. We don't have time to go back to this question, but it might be useful in thinking about this to go back and look at those diagnostic questions about prime reality and nature and those kind of things, and how does our society answer those questions. But this is the one I wanted to talk about here for a little bit. Given this breakdown of the Western worldview, what sort of impact do you think that that's made on our society? Those ideas of progress, optimism, freedom, prosperity, consumerism, science and technology. what impact do you see that having on Western society or society in the United States?
Well, we depend a whole lot on technology, which is both good and bad, because we're able to do so much, but if something were to happen, we don't know how to actually use or act about it.
Yeah, and so we've kind of wedded ourselves to technology, and even those that would kind of cry about it or decry it, that this is horrible, it's pulling us further and further. Most of those people have Facebook pages, right? And so they say, oh, Facebook and social media is separating us from each other. Right there you are, right there on Twitter, right? So we have kind of this idea, this kind of this bifurcated idea of technology is bad, it separates us, but we're still going to be involved in it. All right? And technology can have both that impact socially as well as in other aspects, right? And so technology, of course, has brought us a variety of developments, let's say medically, things that doctors are able to diagnose better or are able to address conditions earlier in someone's life because we have developed technology. Right? So there's some positive impacts on technology. There's maybe some places where it's negatively affected us and how we interact with people. To the point of if suddenly it all went down, where would we be then? Well, some of us would be fine, but there are probably some people that would, not know what to do. Right? Think about, for example, those people that are so dependent upon social media status, and the celebrities in our culture who are famous for being famous. And it's not because they're sports athletes. It's not because they've done great work in the cinema or anything, written a fantastic novel. Those people just famous because they have a lot of people that follow them on Twitter or have a lot of people follow them on Instagram. Well, if that's all gone, where are those people, right? A lot of those people so devoted themselves to that identity. Right? And so that can have an impact on people, so that they've gotten their identity so wrapped up with technology that it's suddenly gone, and then they have to redefine themselves. Other impacts to some of those in our culture to some of those ideas.
With prosperity, again, can be good and bad. We talked about going from nothing to something, and that can either drive you to work hard and to be better than the generation before you, or it can cause you to be selfish and harm others just so you can get to the top.
Yeah, and a lot of that, of course, depends on the person, right? The person that's selfish is going to hoard their belongings. They're going to be so focused on themselves. But prosperity in itself isn't necessarily bad. A rich person, right, just by herself or himself, isn't necessarily bad. It's what they do with their money, right? And so it's not the money that's the problem. It's who the person is inside. But that push for prosperity can drive some people to just be so focused on that goal that they lose sight of their family, or they lose sight of the impact they're having on others. And so with a lot of those elements that we've put up, and others that we could probably bring about to talk about how to talk about the Western worldview, many of them can result in positive consequences or negative consequences. And a lot of it depends on the individual. And so the individual goes to extremes that can end up in difficulty, or it could be something positive. Let's turn then to thinking about, we already talked about some of this, the consequences of the Western worldview, so let's go ahead and move on. Thinking about the Christian worldview. Already, kind of by separating Christian and West, I'm suggesting intrinsically that there is something distinct from the Western worldview and the Christian worldview. That these two are something distinct, and maybe there are some places where the Christian worldview actually critiques the Western worldview. So we shouldn't have a very easy equation between these two ideologies, though sometimes we do kind of muddle them together. And so for the rest of today and into Wednesday, I want us to think about essentially these three questions. What is the grand story of the Christian worldview? How does the Bible address those diagnostic questions? And then finally, what are the things that are Christian values? What are Christian values? What's most important in Christianity?